On it would help. There you go. Good morning. Special day today. I know here in a moment at the end of the service we'll bring Pastor Don and April up and give them a good send off, and out into the east lobby at the end of the service we're going to have some cake. It's like you get cake every day at church. No big deal. No, you're getting cake today. It's a big deal. And thank you. And you'll have a chance to go back and see them, and we're going to have them go into the east lobby and at the end of the service. So there's more room out there, and many of you brought cards. We appreciate that so very, very much. And well, speaking of people switching jobs, did you hear about Bill? Yeah, he quit his job of many, many years, and he decided to clean mirrors for a living. And when asked why, he said, "It's just something I can see myself doing." Come on. That wasn't that bad, was it? All right. 3 of you said it was good. Before we get to all that here in a moment, I just wanted to take a few minutes, on this fourth Sunday of the month when we typically have kind of a practical lesson. I want to talk to you a few moments about change. Because change is a part of our lives, isn't it? It just is a big part of our lives. We're experiencing that now here at Eastside with this change, with Pastor Don moving on from staff. And many of you are experiencing change in your life right now as well. So let me just give you some thoughts about the subject of change this morning, some observations. Number one, change in life is inevitable. It's going to happen. Those of you that are a little more experienced in life, you're going to know the name Bob Dylan. How many of you know Bob Dylan? Bob Dylan, yeah, I mean, Bob Dylan covers so many decades, started in the 60s, and I think he still has music going. If you've ever listened to Bob Dylan, he sounds weird. I mean, it's amazing that he has made it. It's usually his lyrics that are kind of the big deal with his music. He said this one time. He said, "There's nothing as stable as change." I think that's true. I think God prepared us for it. In the very beginning, in the book of Genesis, God says, as long as the earth remains, there will be planting and harvest. That's change. Cold and heat in Missouri the same exact day. All right? Right? Isn't that true? Here lately? Yeah. Summer and winter, some in the same day. Day and night. It just seems like there is going to be change. Change happens all the time. Death brings change, doesn't it? You lose a spouse. You lose a parent. Death just brings change. It does. Finances can change. When the boss calls you in after several years and says, we've got to have layoffs. That's change, isn't it? It changes your life financially. Tragedy brings change. Some of you in this room, you've experienced tragedy, hasn't you? You didn't plan it. You didn't plan it to happen. Health can change, can it? I've talked to you about our situation with my wife and her health condition, and it's created so many changes in our lives. Finances change. Relationships change, don't they? Marriages end. Relationships break up. Friends move away. Kids move out. Eventually. I remember we had 2 boys. I remember when we took our first son to college, and he went to college in Virginia, and we took him and dropped him off. And when we left, I was not prepared for that dramatic change. Nobody really talked about it much, and that was a dramatic change. I mean, it was just all that was happening. We experience change all the time. Aging creates change, right? Can I tell you what happened? This is embarrassing, and it just happened. I was talking about this message, and this is what happened. Yesterday morning, took the little puppy out because he dominates the time. So he's a little bit narcissistic. I mean, it's all about him right now. But anyway, he's cute. He's adorable. He gets it. So you know I'm kidding. But anyway, I fixed myself some eggs and put a little sausage in it. And I got my vitamins out that you have to take at this age. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever there is. And I put this in this little cup, and I got me some milk. And then I took the pills, and I swallowed a little bit of milk, and I put the jar back up, and I grabbed my eggs, and I went to get my milk, and it was gone. I mean, it was right there. Milk doesn't walk away. I'm looking around going, and I turned to Rocky, the dog, and said, "What did you do?" I couldn't find it anywhere. Of course, you know where it was at, don't you? Do you know where it was at? I opened the cabinet door. And I put the little cup back. It's not funny. Who does that kind of thing? I sat there and opened it up, and I saw the milk, and I thought, my life is over. This is terrible. Aging brings some changes. You know what else changes? Church. Do you know church changes? It does. People come and go from church. People move away. People change churches. Staff, when you have a church like ours that's had multiple staff over the course of many years, staff come and go, don't they? Matter of fact, I have to be honest with you. I called a friend about, it's been a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, who pastored in the same church for over 30 years. And I had just reached my 20-year time here. And I was struggling with some things because in a town our size, when you go to the market, you see people. And people who used to be a part of your church. And I know for them, moving on may not have been a big deal, but for a pastor, I'm just being honest with you this morning. I'm just being honest. You take everyone personal. I'm sorry, you do. You go, well, you shouldn't, but you do. You take all of that, and so every time you see, you're reminded. And I called and I said, how do you do it? How do you stay after that much time when you have that kind of rotation? He told me this. He said, you know what, Pastor Fred? He said, you will pastor 3 or 4 different churches if you stay there that long. It's kind of true. You know what I'm saying? It's just churches change. Life changes. Change is inevitable. I'll tell you something else about change. Growth requires change. Doesn't it? If we're going to grow, we have to change. When you get married and you say, you know what, I want our family to grow. Okay. But it's going to change your life, right? You can be retired and decide to get a puppy. And it will change your life. Isn't that true? It does. Families change. If you want to change personally, people say, you know what, I need to get better fit. I just need to be healthier. Well, that's going to require change. Change in diet, change in exercise. We're going to have to make some changes, right? By the way, how many of you here, this church, how many of you want to grow spiritually? Or how many of you are like, I'm good. I'm just, I'm pretty good. I'm telling you, if you want to grow spiritually, guess what? It's going to take some change. There has to be changes that we make in order to grow. By the way, if a church wants to move forward and continue to grow, guess what? Churches have to make change. I will tell you, you can drive around a community like this one, and you can see churches that refuse to. Hello, folks. Come on. We're just talking practical today. You can see churches that just refused and said, the favorite song, I shall not be moved. And I know there's a good part of that, of course. There's a good part. There's things we shouldn't change and we should hold on to. Our anchor in the person of Jesus Christ, of course. But change. Yeah, if we're going to grow, it requires change. Come on, say the definition of insanity with me. Come on, folks. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. There are some people that are frustrated at their lives, complaining and whining consistently, but make no effort to make any changes and wonder why things stay the same. Come on, isn't that right? Growth requires change. Changing and change often requires letting go, doesn't it? Most of the time, I said often, but really, change requires letting go. I want you to picture with me up here. Come on, you with me? I want you to picture with me you went to the circus and you're watching a trapeze artist. All right? You remember this? You know the trapeze artists? They hang on to the swing and they're swinging back and forth. Kind of cool to watch, isn't it? But here's the thing. Somebody on the other side will throw another swing out to them, right? And they're swinging on this one. But in order to get to that one, they're going to have to what? Let go. Now you have options. The trapeze artist has options. They could be swinging up here like this back and forth. They could just hang on. They don't have to let go. They could hang on to exactly what they've got where they're at, right? That's one option. Never change. The other option would be this one. Here's one option. Swing, hang on with one hand, grab the other one with one hand, and stay right there. Have one hand on each. You know what's going to happen if you grab one hand on each? You're going to get stuck in the middle. You're going to get really tired, and you're going to drop. The other option is to let go and then grab onto something new. Right? Here's the thing I want you to think about, though. When we let go of one and grab onto another, there's just that brief, in a trapeze act, there's a brief second when the person is hanging on to, say it with me, absolutely nothing. You know what I'm talking about? You ever been there in life? You ever that place between going from one thing to another, and you're just in that space where you're just like, nothing seems to be happening? There's a name for that kind of space. It's actually referred to liminal space. You've ever heard of liminal space? We all go through this. Liminal space. Liminal space is the space between two states of being when we are no longer this, but not yet that. Liminal space. I gave a message about liminal space. I actually stood right here and preached it. None of you were here. None of you. Did you know that? I stood right here on a Sunday morning and I preached this message, and not a single one of you were in this room. I just looked at the camera because you were all home. Do you remember? COVID? Some of you were like, where were I, Pastor? I can't believe you remember all of that. Oh, I do. I remember who's here. No. Listen, we were just like caught in between, weren't we? Things were all of a sudden stopped. By the way, they were never going to be the same again. And we were just in the middle. Oftentimes we find ourselves like that. By the way, did you know we have ceremonies that actually help us, rituals that help us mark liminal space in our lives? Graduations, not only the student, but the families. When a student goes from high school to either college or career, it's this change. It's a massive change. We have ceremonies to mark these in our lives. Funerals. Yeah, funerals. They're a ritual in our culture to mark what it's been like to be with someone, have them removed from your life, and now you have to go on. And it's all going to be different, right? Some of you are in that space right now. You're dealing with that right as I speak. Did you know weddings are actually that? They are. They're a ritual. They're a ceremony in our culture that says, I've been anticipating getting married, and I'm going to have a ceremony. I've been anticipating. We've been anticipating. Here's the ceremony. Now everything changes. Right? Some of you right now are going, no, yeah, yeah, everything changes. Certainly does. It's kind of how it works like this. It's like you're in this place in your life where you have direction. You're moving, you have direction, everything seems to be in place. Maybe your family, everything seems to be well, your job, your career, your spiritual life. By the way, I want you to hear me. Organizations go through this that I'm talking about right now. Churches, businesses, direction, you know where you're going, everything seems great. Circumstances happen. Things happen. Choices that you make, choices that other people make, and you suffer the consequences of them. Right? Circumstances, and all of a sudden you have direction, and now you're at a place of no direction. You don't know what to do. Have you ever been there? You absolutely don't know what to do. You wonder what to do. No direction. And then, eventually, you have a new direction. Something new to do. Something new comes along and you're like, you know what? This is the direction we're going to take. Because you can't stay here forever, right? Life won't let you. You and I just can't stay with no direction. We have to do something, and this is what happens. Direction to no direction to new direction. Because change often requires letting go. But I will tell you this, and we'll mention this in a second, but that requires wisdom, doesn't it? What do you let go? Right? When do you let go? All of these things require wisdom. I'll tell you something else about change. Change is often accompanied by grief because change and loss are so closely associated. Loss produces grief. Change produces grief. And we all experience it. The writer of the book of Ecclesiastes says there's a time to, say it with me, class, there's a time to what? And a time to what? Laugh. Yeah. Grief. We all experience it. Can I tell you something about grief? Let me just say, we're not good at it. My observation, I've had a really front row seat to grief in my life. I've come upon and been called into scenes that have been incredibly difficult. And grief, our culture doesn't do a good job with grief. Not overall. Most of us don't know how. We've never had it modeled. We were told, many of us were told to what? Suck it up. Move on. We buried it deep, and we don't really know how to grieve. And it's not just the loss of people in our lives. There's all different kinds of grieving that we experience as life brings change. Grief, here's a good little definition of grief. It's the conflicting feeling caused by the end of or change of a familiar pattern of behavior. Right? By the way, did you notice conflicting feeling? Grief often brings conflicting feelings. I remember on a Sunday preaching here, getting back to my house, picked up a pizza, because my wife and I are really into eating healthy. And drove to the house, set it down, got a phone call. My brother was on the phone, and he said, this morning, Dad passed away. Okay. Now, I was hit with just, you've been there. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're hit with a ton of emotions. And had a 3.5 hour drive, jumped in the car, drove down. And there's this different waves of emotion. You know what part of it was? I'm so glad he's not suffering anymore. Because when I left him, the last time I drove up on a Friday, I left on Friday, when I walked out of the house, he was suffering so bad. And so I was relieved. Whew. But sad at the same time. Are you with me? You understand grief, don't you? Conflicting emotions are often mixed. I will just tell you this, grief is how we transition through life. Because the longer we live, there's more of it that happens. And I'm not just talking about the end of, but the change of. Things change. They just change. Whenever I drive down the road, you know what I look for? Can I tell you what I look for? And you have to be maybe this age to look for this. You know what I always look for? I want to find the little greasy Dairy Queen joints. Not Dairy Queen franchise. The old little dairy bars. You know what I'm talking about? The old-fashioned ice cream and the old-fashioned... Again, I eat healthy. We've already established that, okay? So don't give me the look. And the big chili dog. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, I just look for those. And a lot of times you can't find them unless you're in the little towns. Yeah. I wish that hadn't changed. Why did that have to change? I jumped on the motorcycle last year, rode down to my hometown, and I was by myself, rode 3 hours, rode around the town I grew up in, 1,000 people. It's 5 minutes and you're done, so you get to do it several times. You would think, and I drove by the house I grew up in, where my dad's store was at, both of them. It wasn't a joyful thing. It looked terrible. You know what I'm talking about? That town was Mayberry to me. It was so wonderful, but it just looked so different, doesn't it? And I rode away thinking, why does it have to be like this? Right? Why can't it be? When I went to Rebus, that was the Dairy Queen. It was no longer open. Why? Why? Can I ask this question? Gen Z and millennials, why don't you like milkshakes? Why? What's up with this? Put coffee in it. I don't care. Just let's have them. Bring them back. By the way, just for those who are experiencing grief, you don't really get over grief, you get through it. Those who have experienced grief know this is true. People that tell you to get over it, you don't get over it. You don't stop missing certain things. And I'm not just talking about people. You don't stop missing things the way they were, but you will get through it. And then I've already mentioned this one, but a second thing real quick about grief. You can be happy and grieve at the same time. You can. Mixed emotions. Let me tell you something else about change. Not all change is good. Not all change is good. Cancer sucks. That's the first time I've used the word sucks since I started preaching. But it does. And I think it fits. So I said it. Cancer sucks. It's not good when somebody gets that report. It's a change, and it's not going to be a positive change. Accidents are not positive changes. Losing a loved one's not positive change. Losing a job's not a positive change. There are a whole lot of changes that happen that are not positive. They're not good. In and of themselves, they're not good. This is where our faith comes in. This is where faith plays a big role, or should. Right? This is where faith makes a big difference. My faith in Jesus. Not just faith in Jesus. Faith in Jesus makes a difference. Because I believe He is with me in the darkest moments of my life. And that He doesn't leave and He doesn't forsake. Even when I gripe. Even when I whine. He's right there. He doesn't leave. And then that verse that has been used millions of times to bring comfort in difficult circumstances from Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything, say it with me, to work together for good. You know, if you've been here long enough, you know me. I don't believe God causes everything. I don't. And I don't believe God causes everything to teach us some kind of lesson. I don't. I think evil is a part of the world we live in now, and a lot of things that happen has nothing to do with God. Rape, killing, abuse. Please, church, stop blaming God for these things. Jesus made a clear distinction when he came. Clear. The evil one steals, kills, and destroys. I've come to give you life. I don't bring that into your life. But he doesn't leave us to handle it on our own either. He's right there with us. The problem with this verse, you say, did Pastor Fred just say the problem with this verse? Yes, the problem with this English translation of the verse causes you and I to be passive bystanders and wait for God to do it all. Well, bad stuff's happening. I'm just going to wait for God to bring good out of it. Right? I'm just going to sit here until God makes something good out of it. N.T. Wright is a brilliant scholar, and I love his translation of this verse, and it's a little different. You ready? I love this. For we know that God, working together with those of us who have been touched by God's love, is yearning to bring good out of all the suffering and evil we see around us in our world. This is our calling according to God's purpose, to collaborate with the Spirit of God within us to bring His kingdom to earth now. Instead of sitting around waiting for God to bring something good, we do partner with the Holy Spirit in us to bring about as much good as we possibly can. And let's stop sitting around as the church waiting for God to do everything when you and I are His hands and His feet and His mouth and His eyes. We're the body of Christ. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's start being that. Instead of waiting for good to come, let's be the initiators of that good. Let me just tell you also, though, but pain is often an excellent teacher. An excellent teacher. I said pain is often an excellent teacher, and I emphasize the word often. I put that there on purpose because it depends on you and me. It depends on our response to it. You've heard the expression, better or bitter. A lot of that's our choice. A lot of it rests with us. And we might wrestle with this our entire lives. I'll tell you this, relationally, I've learned more about relationships from difficulties. Getting home and my wife says, Fred, we need to talk. Have you ever heard that? Come on. We need to talk. I've learned more about relationships from those little talks. Sometimes they're very painful. I learned a lot about finances, making big mistakes. How about you? You make some mistakes, you learn. I've learned so much about even emotional pain, spiritual change, all of those things. The pain is an excellent teacher for us. Real quick, let me give you some practical advice when you encounter change. You ready? Seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. Jeremiah said this, if you look for me wholeheartedly, you'll find me. You want to know what our first response is when change comes and we don't like it? We start seeking a quick fix, a way out, relief, any way we can get out of it instead of trying to see and find God's hand in the middle of it. Because we're just geared right now. We're so geared to fix it, quick fix, move on, quick fix, move off, and we don't see God's hand in it. We don't seek the Lord. The second one goes right like that. Ask God for wisdom. One of my favorite verses is this from James. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God. I like the idea that he says if. That, by the way, that word could be translated since. How many of you think since fits better than if? Since you need wisdom, ask your generous God for wisdom. Why? Because change is sometimes sudden, sometimes shocking. You don't know what to do. I'm going to tell you something. After COVID, listen, as a pastor who had pastored over 30 years, met with COVID, I found myself looking at a brand new ministerial, pastoral landscape that I was never trained for. And all of a sudden I was in uncharted waters and going, I don't really know what to do. You ever been there? Like everything that I had learned up to that point, everything shifted and changed. And you began to learn quickly. You know what you have to do? Ask God for wisdom. Oftentimes, we ask everybody else first. That's why this next one fits in. Take time to listen. Because again, we're asking everybody else's opinion. I get it. It's easier than listening for God. Can I just tell you something? Listening for God is hard. It takes discipline. Elijah, go out and stand before me in the mountain. The Lord told him. And Elijah stood, and the Lord passed by. Mighty windstorm hit the mountain, terrible blast. The Lord was not in the wind. Then after that was an earthquake. The Lord was not in an earthquake. Come on, class. And after the earthquake, there was a fire. The Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was, say it with me, the sound of a gentle whisper. Let me tell you something about whispering. Something new about whispering. The moment I started, some of your heads went. Whisper. Here's what you have to do when you whisper. Are you going to listen? If you're going to hear somebody whisper who doesn't have a microphone, you got to be close. If you're not close, you won't hear them whisper. Will you? No, you got to be really, really close, and then you got to really, really what? Pay attention. You better pay attention and listen to hear the whisper. I'm convinced God is speaking all the time. We haven't been trained to listen. Real quick. Move past asking why to asking what. The why question is a question of explanation. The answer, I believe, is too complex. If I were to ask and bring a physicist up here, let's say his name is Sheldon Cooper. Some of you will know that name. And Sheldon comes up and he's going to talk to us about the universe and how gravity works and why the planet stays where it does and why the sun holds together instead of flying apart, and began to explain how all that works. You want to know what most of us would do after about 3 minutes? We'd be like, when's this going to be over? Because God, why did all this happen? I think the answer is way too complex for us. We have to move eventually to asking what. Once again, not why did you do this? What are you trying to teach me? I don't think God brings evil into it. God has anything to do with evil. But I do believe this. I believe God has a purpose for your life and mine. And I know what that purpose is. I know. I know what God's purpose for your life is. I do. Do you want to know it? Or are you just ready for cake? You're like, cake is all it's on your mind. Like, preacher, end this so we can get to the cake. Okay. But I will tell you your purpose. God is seeking to conform you to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ, who was the intended purpose for all of us. Jesus is the original and intended pattern for our existence, and everything that happens, God is moving that and conforming us into the image of his Son. By the way, he that began a good work in you will complete it. God won't stop. You can resist it, you can fight it, you can kick against it, but God will do it because he's building character. We can rejoice too when we run into problems. Amen? Okay. And trials, for we know that they help us develop what? Endurance, and endurance develops strength of. And character strengthens our confidence. Salvation, not getting to heaven when we die. Salvation means complete healing, freedom, deliverance. You can trust God. Job made this statement, Job. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Job was misunderstanding. God wasn't the one slaying him. But he did say the right thing when he said, even in the midst of all of that, I'll trust him. Why can you trust God? Why? 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 He's a good father. He's a good father. And you can trust him. Class, change is inevitable. Trusting God in the midst of change is a choice. Sound good? All God's people said. Pastor Don, April, you come up with him, April. Come on. Don, wait for your wife.
I am.
All right.
Oh. I thought you were right behind me. You usually walk faster.
I started a fight. All right. Church, we're going to do this quick so we can let you speak to them personally in the back if you want to. I'll just say this. 20 and a half years working. Don, I have not had, down in April, I've not had a couple more loyal, faithful to the mission here at Eastside, to me personally. Greatly, greatly appreciated. And church, I also don't think this. In my time here, I don't think anybody is more loved by this church than you guys, any staff member that we've ever had. So, yeah. So this is a change, right? This is a big change. As Don's going to be, they're still in this area. I'll have him say words, but leaving our staff, if you're not aware of that. And I'll give you some news after that as well. But Don and April, church, we're going to give them cards. We're going to say it, but one last time with a round of applause, will you let this couple know how much you love and appreciate their ministry here?
I told you before, when you get older, you either cry or pass gas, and I think crying is the better thing. So, yeah. I want to say this, that my wife and I, we will be attending Eastside. We love this church. We wanted to go forward. This message was perfect today in the fact of change in my life, and I just, over the last several months, have felt God impressing, moving, taking, and just talking with certain things, people, and it's nothing. Everybody wants an excuse of why would you do this. Folks, I've done this for over 30 years with my dad and in full-time ministry and everything, but now I'm just moving on to a different transition of style ministry, working with Gentiva Hospice is where I'll be working. And so we'll be in the area, I'll be working in that area. And God has already this last week just kind of shown me that this is really good for us, my wife and I. And I'm also excited because I know we'll talk about here in just a little bit. It's good for Eastside to do some things. You say, well, what's good for Eastside? You're leaving. I'm not leaving. I'll be back and attending. I'm just removing from the staff. You understand that, all right? So there's no issues. There's no anger. There's no... You know, a lot of times that's in churches, that's what everybody, it's got to be something. Well, there's nothing. I wanted another job, all right? I mean, just wanted to do something else. I wanted some change, you know?
I was ready for a chauffeur.
And she's ready for a chauffeur. First time in, 20 years, we rode together to church today. And we made it. We didn't argue. And it was, so, all right? So, hey. I want you to know, and from my wife and all, we love you, and thank you, and some special people just showed up today, and we love you and thank you for that today and made your appearance. So let's eat cake. Would you like to do that? Eat cake.
All right. Don and April are going to make their way back to the East Lobby. Now you're like, East Lobby? We have, many of you who park and come in here, we actually have a lobby out there. Through those doors. So you just go out there, there's more space and there's more room. There's a table there. If you'd like to get a piece of cake, say thank you, drop off a card. You can drop a card off either place and say thank you. Does that sound good? And here's the message I gave last week. Eastside, we're thrilled also to announce at the same time, and I can't wait to announce how this happened, because of the way God put it together, it's just God's fingerprints are all over it. But we have hired a couple who are going to be joining us the Sunday after Easter. All right, the Sunday after Easter. Drew and Lexi Hendrickson are moving up from Springfield, Missouri, where they're currently on staff in a church in Springfield. And he's going to be leading our worship, and Lexi's going to be taking care of our student ministry, our next gen ministries. And we're excited to have them join our church staff. And so change is happening, a new day, and we're trusting the best is yet to come. Does that sound good? So let's go celebrate Don and April. Let's all stand. I appreciate you coming and encourage you if you can stop by there and say hello and a word of appreciation. By the way, you can't talk long because there's a lot of you. All right? Father, thank you. Change does happen, but you're there with us through it all, with your steadying presence, your grace, your mercy, and your love. Dismiss us now in your love, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for coming. You're just...